almost don't want to interrupt the birds, but I'm gonna softly let you know that it is Wednesday, April 17th, 2019. You're listening to Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. That's me, Kenneth Arthur. Don't turn up your volume. This is me softly introducing the show this time, in conjunction with these beautiful birds outside, with one of our guests today. We've got John Gilbert of fieldgoals.com and Mookie Alexander, same website. All three of us, actually, same website, fieldgoals.com. And today we're going to be talking about the Seahawks as I slowly ramp up the tempo and the volume of my voice into a regular broadcast professional speaking voice. And this is Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. And we're going to be talking about Russell Wilson. We're going to be talking about Frank Clark, Bobby Wagner, the salary cap, the upcoming 2019 NFL schedule, all that stuff this week. And this is a Patreon show, but April is brought to you by Joshua Thompson, the sponsor for Seaside Chats this month. He wants to open up the floodgates of the podcast to everyone out there, not just those of you who are contributing at the $2 a month and up level at patreon.com/fieldgoals. No. This is all brought to you by Josh Thompson. And why? He just wants to talk about the Seahawks with you. That's what he's advertising. Josh is doing humanitarian work. He's a chiropractor down in the Dominican Republic. And he's doing some great things down there. So if you happen to be going to the Dominican Republic, and I myself, you may have remembered, went last year, if you've been following my work since at least last August or so. And it's a beautiful place, nice people. I highly recommend it if you can go. And if you're down there, talk to Josh, because he just wants to have a beer with someone and talk about the Seahawks. It's his favorite thing. And that's so much so that he has sponsored the show this month. So thank you to Josh, just the same. Thanks for listening, both Josh and everyone else. And that's how it works out for me. If there's Josh is as valuable as everyone else combined. So thank you so much, Josh, for doing that. But on with the Seahawks, because that's what he wants us to talk about too. And we're going to be talking about the Seahawks. John Gilbert, Mookie Alexander, thanks for joining the show. We will just get right into it. It's Wednesday. That means that it was a day ago, technically, that Russell Wilson announced 4 years, $140 million, $107 million guaranteed, a $65 million signing bonus. John, you've taken the reins and been the lead for us over at Field Goals when it comes to the salary cap and contracts. How would you feel in terms of is this the contract you expected? The value per year, the signing bonus, the total guarantee, does this all fall in line with your expectations? And for Seahawks fans out there, how at ease are you with the numbers given, what we can expect in the next few years?
The contract is 99% in line with what we would expect. The signing bonus is, right in line with top of the market. The salary is right in line with top of the market. I was somewhat surprised that the total guarantees were a little bit lower than in some of the other contracts. Matt Ryan, Aaron Rodgers, they ended up with more in fully guaranteed at signing. But the contract itself, it is not cost prohibitive. It is not something that's going to hamstring the Seahawks going forward. One of the unfortunate side effects of the fact that they haven't had a lot of players that they've needed to extend from, the 2013, 2014 draft classes is the fact that they have the cap space to make sure that they hang on to guys who are key to the team like Russell Wilson. And he's going to be the quarterback going forward. And I don't think this presents any kind of cap issue, that fans should be worried about.
Yeah, it sounds exactly like the contract a lot of people would have predicted quite a while ago. Mookie, your thoughts when you saw the deal and, just the comfort of having a Russell Wilson around for, 4 more years, 5 more technically?
Well, my first reaction was initially disappointment, because that's all that money could have easily gone to Jacoby Brissett.
Obviously, yeah.
Indianapolis's best quarterback, but since that seems to be off the table for now, yeah, I'm ecstatic. I didn't really think the April 15th deadline, the self-imposed deadline was that big a deal. I think they would have gotten a deal done eventually, and they did, like, technically 20 minutes past the deadline. I think that's when he signed, but either way, yeah, it's comforting to know Wilson is going to be here for the long term because, look, he's the best quarterback in franchise history. He's one of the most iconic sports figures that Seattle has ever seen. And he's coming off a fantastic year where you saw some genuine improvements in his game that make you think, all right, now that he's entering his 30s, his game is going to age nicely. And, year by year, we're not just going to see some sort of precipitous decline, barring like serious injury or anything. And I mentioned it before, and others have mentioned it. Seattle's evaluation of other quarterbacks it's not been particularly good. Trading a third-round pick for Charlie Whitehurst, signing Matt Flynn, at least the Wilson draft pick. They quickly realized Flynn wasn't going to be the guy, and they started Wilson. But you got a year of Tavares Jackson. The fact that they've signed Paxton Lynch in the first place, and just the list goes on and on. So Wilson, that's your guy, and you don't have to worry about the draft class for the next couple of years. And it's great to not have this hanging over our heads for the entire offseason, because that it's like every offseason for the last few years, there's been some sort of contract drama involving the Seahawks that extends, into preseason.
Yeah, and not to disagree, but I think when it comes to the Seahawks evaluations of quarterbacks, indeed, Russell Wilson's been the only one, and they've gotten into high profile, quote unquote, high profile acquisitions. When you talk about Charlie Whitehurst, Tavares Jackson, or Matt Flynn, and then Russell Wilson, but I think also a big piece of that profile is simply that they did not have a starting quarterback at the time that they were comfortable with. Obviously, Matt Hasselbeck at that point was not someone that they wanted to move forward with after Pete Carroll had come through. But I think it's still to the point of, they're higher profile, but not many people would expect a third-round pick, that you trade it for Charlie Whitehurst, or a third-round pick that you use Russell Wilson, or very low level starter money for Matt Flynn, like very low level starter money, like those kinds of things too. It's like they kind of never really put a huge investment, and they were hoping that one of these like low level investments would pay off in a big way, which did happen. But we've never really seen them take that big shot like they could have taken with Mark Sanchez, or I think maybe Mark Sanchez was 2009. But they could have taken maybe a bigger shot early on in their evaluations. They could have traded up. They could have done something maybe, or whatever, spent a lot of money and gone out Peyton Manning or something like that. And they never really did do that. So I think what my takeaway from Pete Carroll and John Schneider, for the most part, when it comes to evaluations of, say, prospects, and whether they're rookies in the draft, or whether or not they're like, someone off of a practice squad or something, is that they don't know that much, and that prospect evaluation is always a fairly big gamble or a risk. Would you guys agree with that? And John, would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are so many pieces to prospect evaluation that go beyond just on-field talent. I mean, everything you've got off the field, you've got family issues, you've got people coming with their hand out looking for money. How do players react to that? How do players react to getting dumped? Having hundreds of thousands of dollars put into their bank account when they're in their early 20s. I mean, I never would have survived. I drank enough making a fraction of what NFL players make in my 20s that if I had their money, I wouldn't have been focused at all on work. So There's a huge piece of it that's off the field that has nothing to do with what they do, but between the sidelines.
Yeah, and Mookie, obviously, I was responding to you, so I give you a chance to retort.
Yeah, I can understand what you're saying, that Seattle has never made that. Well, I should specify, under Carroll and Schneider, that big splash. The big splash at the quarterback position. I guess 2012, they could have, gone after one of the other highly touted quarterbacks in the first round. When you had Luck and Tannehill and RG3, and yes, even Brandon Weeden, involving a trade up or just selecting Weeden. But Whedon would just be a total mismatch for Schneider's philosophy.
Mhm.
So, they took the risks per se on Wilson, and he's going to be cheaper at a third round level, and they gave him the money that that was more team friendly in 2015. So he's continued to progress, and really, in the grand scheme of things, what made 2018 so important is that if Wilson had a bit of a lackluster year, either by his standards or just by general, NFL standards, there would be a little bit of, trepidation over, do you want to commit to Wilson long term? But last year, to me, erased any doubts. They have their long term quarterback, and really, the next most important thing is to kind of build around Wilson, knowing that. And, it's not a total slight against the current defense, but it's going to be really hard for Seattle to have an elite defense again. They got to catch lightning in a bottle and find all of these similarly cheap draft picks who find a bunch of Trey Flowers type guys and build from secondary all the way down to pass rush another top 5 unit again. Wilson is the guy right now. It's not, the whole team is so well balanced. It is clearly Wilson's team moving forward, and it's a big task for Schneider and Carroll to see how they're going to construct this roster.
Yeah, I mean, do either one of you guys, there's not going to be much more changed about the Seahawks unless it's and we'll get into it next, but unless it's a trade of a player away of high caliber, I wouldn't expect that there's going to be much change. The rookies don't typically contribute a lot. And so like, it could be little pieces here and there and guys added August, September. But I guess now that Russell Wilson is, locked in for, 4 years beyond next season, it's just another chance maybe to look around, look at the team, see some of the, guys that you hope about and some of the guys that you don't know about, and not knowing who's going to, fill that other safety role. And there's question marks, but looking at the team now, I mean, do you feel that they're still as good as the 10-6 version of last season, and that they'll, be in that position once again to make the playoffs and maybe with a couple lucky breaks win the division? Either one, I guess. If you feel that way.
Okay, I didn't want to jump all over if Mookie was going to answer it. I think they've got a franchise quarterback and they've got a above average defense, and I think any team with that recipe has the opportunity to compete, not just in their division, but in the NFL in general. The Rams are obviously back-to-back division champs now. So, that's kind of a tall mountain to climb or to put any hopes or aspirations, for the Seahawks. But, this is a team that they love challenges. They love being the underdog. And, all it takes is an injury or two, and all of a sudden, Los Angeles is not what they have been the last couple of years. Maybe they have a regression. Maybe they're not quite as dominant as they have been. And maybe the Seahawks do get a couple of those lucky breaks. I think they're definitely better than the Niners and the Cardinals. And so I think it's going to come down to, the 2 games between the Rams and the Seahawks are going to be very, very important for the NFC West this season.
Yeah, Mookie?
Yeah, I definitely think, to me, the way the roster is constructed right now, and you add the salary cap space and just the whole overall talent pool that they have, as things stand now, even before the draft, I'm not sure they're going to be quite like that 12-4, 13-3 team that we've seen, go to the Super Bowl twice. But I don't think there's going to be a significant drop off. Obviously, losing Earl Thomas for good, certainly hurts. However, he was out for most of last season, and they didn't cope well without him, but they coped well enough. So you would hope for some improvements from some of the young starters like Shaquille Griffin and Trey Flowers, and maybe more contributions from Jacob Martin, and Rasheem Green just battled through injury. As John pointed out, some of this is very much down to luck. And, you look at the schedule, we see teams like Cleveland in there, and you would assume Cleveland's going to be pretty good based on their moves throughout this offseason. But as we know, and the reason why I don't ever look at NFL schedule, television specials, is because there's no point in breaking down Week 14 matchups in April. There are just too many variables that happen from the draft onwards to the regular season that that some teams that figured to be good are going to be bad, and some teams that were bad last season are going to have a surprise turnaround. So Seattle can't control how the other teams fare, but the foundation in place, the Seahawks, I don't think they really overachieved at all,
Mhm.
finishing 10-6. They certainly could have started the first couple of weeks of the season better, but once they got into a groove, they were hanging with the Rams in both games. They were hanging around with top competition. So it, they might not be an elite team like 2013 or 2014, but they're certainly not far off. So the key
Yeah.
is essentially player development, injury luck, and I do stress luck on that side of things, and let the chips fall where they may. I'm pretty optimistic, certainly a lot more optimistic than if I heard Wilson wasn't having his contract extended and we would be dragged through the mud for the next several months, hearing about it over and over and over again.
Yeah, yeah, can't
Absolutely.
sell how nice it is that they are not, that we don't have to have that talk. But yeah, I think that the Seahawks, it's one of those things where it doesn't feel like the way that it felt going into 2013 because they were coming off of 2012, but coming off of 2011 going into 2012, especially with the mystery at quarterback, and Russell Wilson, and not knowing, like, even after a few games if he was going to even keep the starting job at that point. That sometimes by the end of that season, that's why we did feel so strongly about their chances of doing the Super Bowl the next season. So, we can cross our fingers and hope maybe that 2019 feels like 2012 by the time it's all said and done, maybe with a happier ending than that. The big question, of course, being not so much like, do the Seahawks have their quarterback at that point, because we had seen the talent of the secondary, and we had seen the talents, Bobby Wagner right away, and there was stuff going on. But I definitely think that there's an opportunity and a chance. It's just interesting now that they're a veteran team with these high paid players. And the next one coming up, obviously it's already happened, of course, because he has a $17 million franchise tag, is that of Frank Clark. So Mookie, what do you expect now with the Frank Clark situation, now that Russell Wilson's contract is taken care of? Do you think this makes it more likely that he's going to get traded, as many people have been talking about recently, or just another time to hold tight? What are your thoughts on Frank Clark?
I'm on the fence a bit with this one. I actually, if I had to lean one way at this point, even though I think I was on your on the podcast a couple of months ago, and I said please resign Frank Clark, I would not be surprised if they traded him, and some of that is just to improve draft capital moving forward. And I think that Schneider and Carroll are pretty confident with their eye for talent for pass rushers. Even the limited snaps that Jacob Martin showed that was pretty promising, and of course the acquisitions of Averill and Bennett over the years, even the trade for Chris Clemens, which for real field goals OGs made this place flip out back in 2010 when they got rid of Darryl Tapp for Chris Clemens. So it's probably going to cost quite I'm sure John can pull me up on this for salary cap situation, but we've seen other pass rushers, including DeMarcus Lawrence, get massive contracts. So the market's kind of been set for Frank Clark. Will the Seahawks be willing to meet what would presumably be Clark's demands to be paid like an elite pass rusher? I am not entirely sure, but I know that there would be enough of a viable market to have Frank Clark services. So it'll be very, very interesting to see whether or not the Seahawks will just send Clark on his happy ways, or if they're going to do what they can to at least keep him in the fold through this season. I would love for him to be here long term because, again, these last two seasons, I think Clark is developing into one of the league's better pass rushers, and he's a pretty important part of the Seahawks defense.
Yeah, absolutely. They don't have much else outside of Frank Clark right now when it comes to edge rushers that we know of. John, we've talked about the salary cap, and what would moving Frank Clark's $17 million franchise tag, getting that off the books for next season, what would that do for the team? What are the current rule situation in terms of like rollover, or how does that all work? And so that everyone can maybe get a better understanding of the benefits perhaps that would come with dropping the franchise tag from their salary cap. And then, you can also just chime in on your thoughts on the idea of extending or keeping or trading Clark.
It's pretty simple. As long as the franchise tender, the tag tender is out there, the $17 million stays on the cap. The instant he's signed and traded, or the tag is rescinded, that money comes back to the cap right away. They have it to spend for 2019. That said, there's not a whole lot left out there on the free agent market to spend it for 2019. I mean, there are some, role players, some contributors, but no one who's going to come in and be an impact player like Frank Clark. And that said, kind of what I would expect, I won't be surprised to see is if, the July 15th deadline for him to negotiate a long-term deal with the team comes and goes. We saw DeMarcus Lawrence. Obviously, he set the market for, pass rushers just a couple weeks ago. But the question is who else out there is going to reset the market over the next 12 months? If that answer is no one, if the market is not going to change in the next 12 months, then let Clark play out the tag and sign him for $484 or $5,105 next year. There's no need to commit that kind of money right now when you have him for $17 million for 2019. Is it going to be the most fun for fans to have to listen to the contract situation all year? Not really, but he can't negotiate during the season. If he's on that tag from July 15th until the end of the regular season, week 17 game, we don't have to worry about it because they can't negotiate. So we can then pick it up during the playoffs and then start talking about it. And that's kind of what I'm expecting at this point, because from a team standpoint, that's the most beneficial for them.
There are two other players to take care of with Bobby Wagner and Jaron Reed. John, any thoughts on how the team sort of approaches? Because there's this whole thing now. If you get Frank, you got Russell Wilson locked in, and then maybe you trade Frank Clark. Then you've got one franchise tag to use next year, and maybe you focus on either Bobby Wagner or Jaron Reed, and they're in different places in their careers, obviously, by quite a few years. But in the ways that linebackers age and everything, John, what are your thoughts there?
Obviously, if you only get to keep one, Wagner or Reed, I think you keep Reed just because he is younger. Excuse me, sorry about that. That said, because 2020 is the last season of the current CBA, there is a unique piece in there, and that is that next off-season teams get both a franchise tag and a transition tag that they can use. What that means is that with the big four who were set to be free agents, one of those has already been knocked out. Now it's just a matter of figuring out which one of the other three they can get done first, because if they get done Wagner or Reed or Clark, then there's only two. You franchise one, you transition the other, and then you're basically guaranteeing that all four of them will be with the team in 2020. It may not be real pretty. It might be a whole lot of publicity that the team, has to listen to and whatever, but I don't think they care. They're a business, and they're designed their goal is to put the best defense on the field that they can. And, if using a transition and a franchise tag is what allows them to do that, or at least gives them the leverage to do that, then I don't think that's an issue. That said, I don't think they have any problems, signing Reed to a reasonable contract during training camp, an extension like we saw, Lockett this past season, or any of the August extensions that we've seen for key players. And that's kind of what I'm expecting on that time frame.
Yeah, I know for me, there's a part of me that is concerned with Reed signing now, because it's like that could have been his best season that we'll ever see. And he may be a better candidate in my mind, maybe for the tag next year, for a tag, one of those two tags. Perhaps just because if he goes from 10.5 sacks back to 1 sack, it's a much different dollar valuation than if he repeats 10.5 sacks. And then everyone's saying, oh, maybe we got another Geno Atkins here. And that would be interesting, as opposed to Bobby Wagner, who is in and out, just the same guy. And seems like, there have been a lot of Hall of Fame safeties Hall of Fame inside linebackers that have played into their late 30s and or mid to late 30s, and maybe that's not going to be the case with Bobby Wagner. And, there's plenty more cases of players who don't make it to their mid 30s. So it's anecdotal evidence on my part, of course, but just interesting to see maybe that Bobby Wagner would be a guy that they could look at and say, hey, come on, you've been here since 2012. We took care of your other 2012 buddy. Let's get this deal done, because we know how important you are to that side of the ball. And maybe Bobby Wagner will be the first to sign, and then you keep Jaron Reed, hanging around and see how that goes. And maybe if he is off to a good start, or this kind of start that applies to it, then maybe they'll extend him in December, as they have many other players. Mookie, how do you feel like, if you had to rank importance right now for Frank Clark, Jaron Reed, and Bobby Wagner in terms of getting a deal done, where do you rank them?
Good question. I would go in terms of most important to least important. Just on age alone, I have to go Clark one, and then I would put Wagner over Reed, even though Wagner's older, because he's essentially now the best player on the defense by a country mile at this point. Of course, the major and he plays to me at a more important position than Jaron Reed. I love Jaron Reed, and he was phenomenal last year. You go from 1.5 sacks first year and second year to a gigantic leap to 10.5 sacks in year three. You are really excited about what Reed can do, whether he can be, he was billed as a run stuffing interior guy initially, but now he's become a very important part of the pass rush. But Wagner, of course, has done everything for years. We've seen his work. He's going to be a future Hall of Famer. Uh, One thing about Wagner is he's been historically very durable. He's scarcely missed any time on the field. But and I think it was John who wrote about the aging curve, and just within the context of the Seahawks, we have seen a lot of our favorite players over the last several years kind of hit that point where the durability starts to go away, or they suffer a devastating injury right around the time they hit 30. I'm not saying that's going to happen to Wagner, but if it does happen to him, we're going to see a precipitous decline, and I don't want to see a repeat of what happened with Cam Chancellor. But that's football. So yeah, Clark to me is of high priority because there's just not there's some good edge rushing talent and promising edge rushing talents on the Seahawks depth chart and maybe through the draft. But Clark right now to me is already great. Wagner has established himself as great. You would love to see him around, 3 or 4 more years, but for the most part, nobody stays with one team forever in this day and age. And then Reed, he's still on his rookie deal. So if they could sign him to a reasonable contract, that would be ideal. But after a year three like that, where he could have been an arguable Pro Bowl snub, it certainly would be a bit higher than if they extended him in the previous offseason. So, yeah, there is a lot to get through. This defense being kind of retooled in a way, and at the same time, while you have these young talents like Shaquille Griffin and Trey Flowers, and I'm almost tempted to put in Akeem King and Delano Hill in there. They're trying to develop into serviceable players or above. You have your 3 key players, all with looming contract deadlines coming up soon. That will greatly reshape how this team operates on defense moving forward.
And moving forward chronologically, let us move forward another week and talk about the NFL draft, which is going on next week. And it's interesting because we talk a lot about first picks, Rashad Penny, and they get a lot of the focus when it's the first pick. And for the Seahawks, we know that right now they're slated to pick 21st, but everyone expects them to trade down, which I think is a reasonable and correct expectation. But whether or not they move down 10 spots, 5 spots, 25 spots, the first pick will still be the player of focus. We saw that even when they had Paul Richardson, 45th pick, I think a few years ago. And, but he sort of becomes, well, that's the guy that we're going to focus on. Or, Frank Clark, him being, when the Seahawks didn't have a pick, I'm pretty sure Frank Clark was the first pick. But and then he becomes the focus. So for this year, when we're looking at the first pick, it's always going to be a thing of, well, was that the positional value that I valued the most? So for both of you guys, and starting with John, what is that position right now that you say you would value the most in this upcoming draft when it comes to the Seahawks first pick?
I mean, not necessarily the pick, because I think they'll make the earliest, but I think they've got the young secondary, like Mookie touched on, but I think there's still gaping holes to fill there with the loss of Earl Thomas. Coverage is so important in today's NFL, where the passing game rules everything, and that's my big area of concern. That or pass rush, edge rusher. I mean, coverage or edge rush, whatever. Take your pick. So.
And Mookie?
I would expect Carroll and Schneider I would expect them to go for I think in the mock draft we picked Jerry Tillery out of Notre Dame. Again, going on the interior, the defensive line, the run defense was objectively not good last year. Whether you look at basic metrics or advanced metrics, and you know that Carroll is fixated. If he was going to be fixated on fixing the rushing offense last year, and I've written about this as well, he probably wants to shape up this run defense to be at least above average again. But personally, I would look at wide receiver, and a good chunk of that is because of the surgeries that Doug Baldwin had last season and is going to have later this offseason. You don't know if he's going to be the same player. He's already hit the age 30 mark. So, he's been a great player for several years, but if he starts to drop off, then you have Tyler Lockett. And Lockett was phenomenal in 2018, and I expect him to continue to be an outstanding player. But Baldwin, to me, if you compare the skill sets, Baldwin is the most important receiver on the roster. So you go past Baldwin and Lockett, and then you have kind of a mesh of mediocrity per se. You have David Moore, who started off red hot, but I think teams kind of figured him out. And he was essentially he was borderline benched against Dallas because he had a paucity of snaps in that game. So you would hope that Moore improves, but you shouldn't necessarily assume improvement out of everybody. You optimistically think that they're going to improve, but some guys, that's just as good as it gets. And Moore is a 7th round pick, and historically, those types of guys tend not to contribute a whole lot throughout their years in the NFL. You have Jerron Brown, and I know Brown caught several touchdowns, but he also had 19 targets the entire season. So that's not a lot of production. At tight end, if you look at tight ends from a pass catching standpoint, there's Will Dissly, who of course is going to be the greatest tight end of all time. But then Ed Dixon, he could be a cap casualty, and then Nick Van Nett's in a contract year. So I just think that the Seahawks need to focus, especially with Wilson getting this new contract, towards building this offense more towards being an elite passing attack, and they just need more talent at wide receiver. And that's basically my strongest argument in favor of them going for receiver. And they've had some success in the past. I think Richardson could have worked out a little bit better if he wasn't so injury prone, and we've seen that Lockett has worked out in a big way.
Yeah, I know historically Schneider and Carroll, when it comes to the first pick, the value that they'll place on it, wide receiver is one of the ones where they seem to think that their best way to get a receiver of note is by spending a considerable amount of value. They used a first round pick. They've never used a first round pick on one directly, but they've traded one for Percy Harvin, and then second round picks like Golden Tate and Paul Richardson. And then they've spent money on Sidney Rice and Harvin again. And, it certainly is a one that they'll place up highly for positions. And when it comes to using that, they've also used first round picks and early picks on offensive linemen and defensive linemen, specifically, usually in the interior, perhaps. And then, we haven't seen them so much go that way early on with much value at the cornerback position or the safety position, ironically enough. And they've got a bunch of different needs this year that they could probably even go best player available and feel, comfortable with that. But is there any position that you guys see rumored that makes you feel like, not that, what would be on the opposite side? John, what would you say is something where it's like, well, I know that there's people who say they could take a blank, which could be whatever, but I don't think that would be the way that they should go. Who knows what they will do.
I mean, for me, I think that position would be tight end. There's obviously questions, Mookie touched on, the fact that they do need offensive weapons. They need targets for Wilson. And there's a whole lot of hype around a whole lot of different tight ends, whether it's any of them, Fant or any of the other tight ends coming out. But historically, the returns on first-round tight ends just are not there compared to other positions in the draft. And, that way, if they, draft a first-round tight end, I think for me, that would be a bigger, kick in the gut than them using a first-round pick on a running back last year.
Yeah, I mean, interesting. Tight end is one, of course. Also, they've used on Zach Miller, and they've used a first round pick on Jimmy Graham. So certainly, tight end is something that they also place a little bit of value on. Mookie, same question.
Yeah, what I say that I would like to see Seattle, or at least I implied Seattle at least upgrade its tight end position. I didn't mean spend a high draft pick on it. So yeah, that would be a bit of a surprise and kind of a disappointment. No need for Noah Fant when you already have George Fant. Of course, George Fant is going to be not only one of Seattle's best offensive linemen, he's going to be a 70 catch guy, 800 yards, 10 touchdowns. But seriously, where I hope they don't go is they don't go dig into the well for running back again. That seems like the easy answer there. They're pretty set there for the time being. I don't know if they were necessarily pleased about Rashad Penny's rookie season, but you have Carson, you have Penny. Who knows what's going to happen with Procise? And then you have McKissick, and I hope McKissick can find his way into this offense, especially with Mike Davis gone. Uh, as a whole, there really aren't too many positions I can think of where if the Seahawks spend an early pick on that. Actually, to me, one surprise would be offensive linemen. I'm not saying that this is like an elite offensive line group or anything, but what they have now with Brown, Brits, so that's two stars there. You got Effetti, who's been much improved, especially last season. Then you re-signed Fluker. Perhaps Jordan Simmons could be an X factor there, and then you also signed Iopati. They do not need to invest in the offensive line early this year. I think they've done a good enough job on that front over the last couple of seasons. Despite the whole reputation that the Seahawks just draft not, they just sign UDFAs and get 6th and 7th round picks and then make that a starting line. No, they've got enough talent there, enough proven talent and emerging talent that there's no need for an offensive line selection early, the first couple of picks.
Yeah, it could go either way. There's a lot of different directions they could go in, and it would be interesting. I definitely think a lineman would be pretty underwhelming for a lot of people at this point who just want to see maybe some more. They want to see some of these superstars replaced that have been falling off in the last couple of years. So there haven't been any superstars on the offensive line, so it's kind of hard to replace them. Last question for both of you, maybe since the draft is a week away. Can you guys recall perhaps a time when you saw the Seahawks not select someone in the draft that they had the opportunity to select that really ticked you off? I know you could pick last year. This is not a real thing, but a lot of people are ticked off that the Seahawks didn't draft Derwin James, but they had no opportunity to draft Derwin James. It was just so close that I guess people figured that the Seahawks should have traded up, which would have been hard to do without a 2nd or 3rd round pick, which they didn't have. So there wasn't really a lot of opportunity for them, I think, to trade up, or that anyone was asking them to trade up. But I know a lot of people thinking Derwin James. And then, but going back here in the Pete Carroll, John Schneider years, perhaps any draft pick players that you remember, and maybe they didn't turn out that great. I remember I did want the Seahawks to draft CJ Spiller. I thought CJ Spiller looked freaking phenomenal, and I wanted him to be a Seahawk, and he wasn't. And, while he did eventually become a Seahawk after much of his value, what little ones that he did have for a while there in Buffalo did dissipate. I didn't, it wasn't, my thought there was not the best way that the Seahawks would have gone in 2010. That's for sure. And for you guys, anyone that got away that really sort of, upset you at the time, starting with John?
I mean, not really. I'm not nearly as big into college football as I am the pros. I'm as guilty as any Seahawks fan. I was stoked in 2009 when they got Aaron Curry. So that's my draft acumen in a nutshell. I've been disappointed by draft picks from Rick Meyer all the way to Aaron Curry, and I don't expect a whole lot from they're players who've never played a snap in the NFL. So we kind of I don't watch enough college football to know, anybody who's not on a team not named the Kansas Jayhawks, and the majority of them are not going to be playing on Sundays. So, I just kind of start my draft study kind of truly starts when the Seahawks are picking their players, and then I'm going to do research into the players that they select. So, I don't have a whole lot of. I'm sure there are if you gave me more time, but the regrets or the people we wish we hadn't missed on or whatever. But it's that's I'm the bad person to ask on that, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
No, I don't think so. I'm not an expert on college football either. I watch a few games a year, I think. And as a Washington State University fan, they aren't usually good games. So, Mookie, how about yourself?
Yeah, funnily, I guess that makes three's a crowd because I used to watch college football religiously, like 9 in the morning all the way through late evening. Now I just handpick, I just go around channel flip and see which games interest me on a weekly basis, but I just don't keep up as well as I used to. And part of that is also because my job just kind of eliminates a lot of Saturday nights for me in the first place. But just looking through some past Seahawks drafts, I suppose when they drafted Malik McDowell, I wanted one of Kevin King or Buda Baker, and part of that is just bias being a Washington Huskies fan. I felt that Kevin King would have been a great fit for the Seahawks defense, but as I gather, I don't think King has been particularly good in Green Bay, but it's early in his career. It's possible that he can turn things around. And then Buda Baker, again, nobody really pays attention to Arizona, but I believe he made the Pro Bowl as a special teams guy, and I think he could have been Seahawks material, but I believe he had also some sort of serious injury in college that could have given Seattle some pause. But beyond that, nothing has really upset me over the years, like drafting somebody when you could have had this. But I'm just thinking back to the Aaron Curry pick, and maybe I wanted Michael Crabtree, but good thing that never happened because you don't want a mediocre receiver like Crabtree in your lineup, and it would have been even worse with the actual mediocre team that he would have been on for years. And then 2010, I had no issue with the Okung and Earl Thomas picks, but I do distinctly remember because Hasselbeck was looking so washed up that I kind of fooled myself into thinking maybe they should give Jimmy Clausen a shot. And yeah, that's a freezing cold take if there ever was one.
Yeah. Well, you just never know. I think it's interesting too. Yeah, we've all touched on it, and it's just we can all watch college football or pay attention to the draft. I certainly have been that guy in the past who was super into the draft and made mock drafts and all that kind of stuff. And it's just to see then there's so many quote unquote experts on Twitter, and also professional ones. And at the end of the day, there are still people who've been scouts, like NFL scouts for 40 years, who could look at a prospect and tell you this guy's going to be a star and be absolutely wrong, and tell you another guy's going to be a dud and be absolutely wrong. And there's just no formula to it. I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting how often these guys go from like highly ranked recruits to being the number one pick in the draft or highly drafted. And I think it's just, when there's a guy who is especially talented, you just kind of know it in terms of that way. But so many of them too, they just fall off, and it's just so unpredictable. And this, there is certainly a pattern to the guys that the higher you're drafted, the more likely you are to be successful. And we see examples that go either which way. I think a lot of that too does have to do with opportunity, and the amount of effort and will and opportunities, even after failure, that they'll give to a higher draft pick than a lower draft pick. But, in general, the Seahawks will take some guys this year. I assume it'll be more than 4 as they trade down, add some picks. Some of them, a lot of them probably won't be superstars or stars or starters. But I think everybody, if you temper your expectations, you should be pretty satisfied every year with Seahawks drafts, I think, if you know what to expect. And trading down certainly does lower their odds of coming away with a player of significant note, especially for next season. But that's the end of me rambling about nothing. Let's wrap this up. John, I know you just changed your Twitter handle, so where can people find you?
I am at John P. Gilbert NFL on Twitter. And obviously you can read my stuff on Field Goals.
And at Mookie Alexander. Mookie, are you working on any enemy reactions maybe?
Not at the moment, but there will be one. The last couple of years, I've done one for like reaction for every team from the first round of the NFL draft. So that will be coming when the draft rolls along. And then I'll see what happens throughout the offseason. But there will be some classic games highlighted, maybe even from the Mike Holmgren era too.
Great. That sounds great. And, you can find us at Field Goals and myself at Kenneth Arthur S. And, this is a Patreon show. If you want to support the show or, you want to support me, you can do that at patreon.com/Field Goals. $2 a month and up is for all the podcasts and everything. And, once again, this is brought to you by Joshua Thompson. Go to the Dominican Republic and have a beer with him and talk about the Russell Wilson contract. That's the reason that he's doing this. If anyone wants to go to the Dominican Republic, please hit us up. I'm not paying for it. You're paying for it. But yeah, I'll connect you with Josh Thompson down there in the Dominican Republic. So thank you, Josh. Thank you for everyone for listening. Come back next week when they be talking about the NFL draft going down in a little more than a week. All right. See you.